back joining us, business attorney from Shenon Law Group. And today we're going to be discussing the PPP changes. We knew this was happening because our psychic Natela told us that it would happen 2-3 weeks into the PPP loan program being instituted. So I thought, what it can't be more appropriate. We have to have Natela back on. She predicted it. And I think a lot of people did too, but she was right on the money about the different changes that were going to happen, which makes me think, like, did you have an insider?
Unfortunately not. I wish. It's in logic.
Yeah, it's all based on logic. So I'm glad for a change Congress is using logic to kind of undo some of their errors. So let's jump in. So we're going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act. And this is the part 2 version of what the actual PPP program was, right? So the part 2 of the CARES Act that corrects all the errors or all the issues that Natela pointed out during the first time that she was on our Expert Insights. So Natela, tell us, let's start off with the time period changes. So what are the significant things to know about the time changes?
Well, I was actually thinking of maybe starting off because I've been talking a lot about the PPP loan as it applies to business entities and not as it applies to sole proprietors and independent contractors. And I think that because the requirements for forgiveness are actually pretty vastly different, I was just going to kind of get that out of the way and just
for which one? For the independent contractors?
So it actually works the same for independent contractors and sole proprietors, vastly different than the way that it works for entities. So just it's kind of brief and easy, I suppose. So the way that it works for independent contractors and sole proprietors is that they can basically, because when they originally got this PPP loan, the amount of this loan was basically based on their Schedule C essentially. And that basically talks about, well, how much money are they making? What's their profit as an independent contractor or a sole proprietor? Yeah.
What, I'm going to be the person that is asking these questions in their mind, but probably not courageous enough to ask. What's a Schedule C? Can we break that down for people that don't know?
Well, quick disclaimer, I'm not an accountant nor tax law expert, but from my understanding, it's a document that's part of a tax return that a sole proprietor files on which they
on their personal income taxes.
Personal income tax return, where they talk about a profit that they might have made from some business venture as a sole proprietor. So it's possible they also had a job and just got a regular paycheck and maybe did something on the side. So it's that schedule that talks about the net profit, at the end of the day, of what they make on this sole proprietorship venture, basically. So when they originally got this loan, they submitted this to whatever financial institution issued them the funds. And the way that they looked at it is that they took the, for entities, they would take the average of the payroll. For someone that's a sole proprietor or an independent contractor, they would take the average of the net profit that this individual would have made, in that year, 2019. So just to give a really very easy example. So let's say the average net profit of that person was $5,000, right? So what they would do is they would take $5,000 and they would multiply it by 2.5. And so, you would end up with basically 12,500, right? And that gives you 2.5 times whatever the monthly average was. So the way that this money now can be used in order for it to get forgiven is that this same amount of the net 5,000 can be paid to this sole proprietor or independent contractor over an 8-week period. So twice, basically. If it was 5,000 a month, they can pay themselves 10,000 a month. The rest of the money, the 25% that they got extra, has to be used on rent, utilities, mortgage, and things of that nature. So that's how it gets forgiven for independent contractors and sole proprietors. So it's a little bit less complicated than for business entities, but I think that people were very confused. They thought that they could just take this whole amount and pay it to themselves and then of course pay taxes on it. So it doesn't quite work this way. 25% has to be spent on other stuff, and you could do it within a 24-week period versus before it used to be 8 weeks.
Gotcha. So that's kind of good news, right, for independent contractors and sole proprietors. I know we had a lot of people on our expert insights we did with Barton Pagosian, the CPA, and we had a lot of independent contractors asking, you know, how they're going to prove up their spending. How do they just write themselves a check like they normally would?
Yeah, they just write.
I mean, it's
well, there's not really a check to be written.
Check to write, yeah. So they just transfer it into a personal account from a business account.
I don't think they don't have a business account because remember they don't have.
Well, if they're a sole prop.
Well, they might or might not, but I don't even think that that's what gets proven up. I think that the assumption right away is that 75% just gets to stay with them, no questions asked, cares, right? So then this 25% that needs to get spent on other stuff, they will likely be asking for invoices and receipts to prove payment. But what I think the real benefit of the new revisions that came out to independent contractors and sole proprietors is the length of the time period in which they can spend the other 25%. Because, you know, some of these sole proprietors, maybe it's a side gig and they're doing it from home and they don't really have rent or, you know, much of utilities or anything like that. Maybe they have a phone bill and it's $200 a month, right? So now, you know, $200,000 a month over, you know, 4 months becomes a much more significant amount than over an 8-week period. So I think that's where it helps them.
Very nice. So let's talk about the timeline changes. Previously, you had to spend the money within 8 weeks, and now we've moved it up to 24 weeks.
Correct. So now it's been moved up to 24 weeks, but that is not the only timeline change. The other timeline change is the fact that you also now have the ability, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, probably a couple of questions further down the road, but before you had to basically rehire your staff to bring it up to the same level of full-time employees as you did prior to the pandemic, and you had to do it by June 30th, I believe. So now that's been extended to December 31st, which is very helpful. It could allow people to get back up on their feet and, you know, be able to rehire these people. And then the other timeline change is the fact that if there is an amount that ends up not being forgiven, you now have 5 years instead of 2 to repay it.
Awesome. So previously you had to use up the monies within an 8-week period, which for some businesses, I know you mentioned during our first live that we did, is just not possible, especially for restaurants and businesses that are nail salons that are still closed. So now instead of 8 weeks, they've extended it to 24, which is great for all those businesses that are still not up and running. And then that rehire time period has also been pushed back, right? That's the December 31st.
Wow.
Awesome.
Well, there's a caveat with the rehire too, but we could talk about that now or later, up to you.
Yeah, tell us about it.
So which I think is really fantastic that they did this. I think that's really going to give a lot more flexibility to people because, you know, I've had clients come and say to me, you know, either A, we don't have enough business to hire everybody back. Why would we do that? Or B, you know, we're trying to rehire people back, but they're making more money on unemployment, so they're refusing to come back.
Right.
Or C, you know, we had someone that quit and now we can't find anyone else that's just as qualified and we're worried we're not going to make it in time. So we still don't quite know what it's going to look like because they have not come out with an amended forgiveness application, but there is going to be a safe harbor for any one of these scenarios where you're not going to be penalized for not being able to bring your staff back up to full time and have the same number of employees, assuming that you can either show that your business can't support it financially and or doesn't need it, or C, you've had people who have quit, or B, you've asked people to come back and they have refused, or D, you just can't find anyone to fill the positions that you need that you had prior to the pandemic. What it's going to look like is hard to tell at this point, but I would just recommend, if you find yourself in this position, just make sure that you just document things really well. So like, let's say if someone is quitting, you know, ask them to give you a resignation letter, even if normally you wouldn't, and maybe you have a you know, less formal sort of work environment, and people just verbally will say to you, you know, I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice. Make sure that it's documented by them to you. This way, you know, you can show it when the time comes. You know, if you offer someone a position back and they were refusing, write them a confirming email saying, you know, thank you for your time, but please allow this email to confirm that I've, you know, invited you to come back to full-time employment, and for whatever circumstances you chose not to. So just document it really well, because they will ask you likely to show them something. Maybe it'll be based on a declaration under oath. It's hard to tell at this point, but just to be safe, I would recommend documenting everything really well.
And so along the lines of asking an employee to come back and them refusing because they're on unemployment, is there an obligation that employers have to notify EDD?
I'm not an employment attorney.
I've read that somewhere. I don't know if it was on the application or what.
I would be inclined to say yes, assuming you can get a hold of someone there.
Right, to send notice to the EDD that you've offered employment and they've refused.
Correct. Right.
As proof for your forgiveness.
Right. Yeah. But here's the thing though, it's so muddy in the sense that, you know, let's say you let someone go in early March, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got a thing saying this person is now on unemployment due to being let go. Fill out this form if, you know, anything is different. Otherwise you can throw it in the trash, right? And so you think to yourself, yes, I did let this person go. They're now on unemployment. I've been paid into the unemployment insurance. Everything looks good. This piece of paper now goes into the trash because everything is accurate and you don't have anything new to report to EDD, right? From that point forward, I don't think that you have a way of knowing whether this person continues to be on unemployment, right? So where I'm trying to go with it is that, let's say, you know, you offer someone their job back, they're not necessarily going to be honest with you and say, hey, you know what, I'd rather not because I'm making more money on unemployment. They can come up with some other excuse. I have a kid at home. I decided to do something else. I want to take a break from work. And you have, at that point, you really have no way of knowing, because they're certifying for their unemployment benefits every 2 weeks, but EDD doesn't send you anything on a biweekly basis. You only get this thing in the very beginning when they just file for unemployment. So, you know, it's kind of a weird position to be in.
Yeah, I think that was the golden nugget of this video, Natela. I'm gonna, for all of you who didn't catch that, go back and watch that little part again. That was the golden nugget for all of you that are worried that your like employer is going to report you to EDD and yada, 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 yada. Don't give more information.
A really spiteful employer who is going to, you know, tell them anyway, regardless
right.
if they know for sure or not. So, you know, make sure you know who you're dealing with.
So let's go to the, I actually have a question for you that's related to this 24-week period. Yes. So from my understanding, if the loan was received before June 5th, the recipient has the option to not do the 24-week period and to do the 8-week period, right? Instead.
I don't know that it makes a difference though.
It doesn't make a question. So listen to this question. If we're going to proceed with the original 8-week timeline for filing for forgiveness, can we use the 60-40 ratio versus the old 75-25? So it's like having your cake and eating it too. Like, I'll take this part of the old law and this part of the new law.
I believe so. I haven't seen anything that says that it has to be spread evenly across 24 weeks. So I don't see why not.
I'm of the same opinion. I did a little bit of digging. I saw nothing that restricted or that there was a caveat to choosing a different time period. So if you've paid everything during the 8-week period and you were somebody who received loans before June 5th, you make that argument. I didn't see anything. There was, you know, there is, if a borrower uses less than 60% for payroll, it's partial forgiveness. So at the end of the day, you'll still get something forgiven, but I'm not sure. I just don't know why anyone would do that, right? So why would you take the risk versus allocating it over a time span? And saying, okay, here's I guess it would be for a company who maybe stopped functioning altogether.
The only reason why I would think that it might behoove someone to do it is if they also got an EIDL loan. And now we're getting into sort of like completely different territory, because
Right.
EIDL loan has to be used for operating expenses, but it can't be used for the same exact thing as the PPP, right? So if you got the PPP and the EIDL and you want to start using the EIDL right after the 8-week period for payroll, because you can, once the PPP funds run out, you just can't say that you used it. Basically, you can't double dip. You can't say that you use it for the same stuff, right? So that's kind of the only scenario in which I would see that it might make sense for someone to try to make it in within those 8 weeks. Other than that, I don't really know. I don't think they really care if you spend it in 1 week versus 8 versus 10 versus 24, so long as the ratios are appropriate and it does not exceed 24 weeks.
I am in total agreement. So let's talk about the ratio changes that happened. Tell us about this 60-40.
Right. So prior to this, it used to be 75% of the loan has to be used for payroll and 25% can be used for rent, mortgage interest, utilities, and things like that. And this ratio has since been changed to 60-40. So now 60% has to be used for payroll and 40% can be used for rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. And if you end up using less than 60%, then you still qualify for partial forgiveness. So I don't want anyone to think that if they only end up using 50% or 55%, then forgiveness is completely off limits for them. That's not accurate. So it'll be prorated in some fashion, which again, we're still unclear on what it's going to look like because they have to come up with an amended application, but you can get at least a partial forgiveness for using some of it on payroll.
So basically, if somebody receives a loan, they have 24 weeks to use it up, and 60% goes to payroll, 40 goes to rent, utilities, whatnot.
Right.
And then when they're all finished, is the application for forgiveness just available to them to get everything forgiven, or do they have to sit around and wait until this 24-week period ends?
I don't think that they're going to have to sit around and wait until the 24-week period ends. I think they're going to have to sit around and wait until the financial institution from which they got the loan is going to come out with their own forgiveness application. Because as you recall, when people applied for the loan itself, the SBA sort of published a general application and then each financial institution adopted it to their own liking. And they, some asked for different documents than others. Some asked, formatting looked different. So I think it's going to be the same thing with forgiveness. I think that each financial institution is going to go based off of the framework that the SBA is going to give and then have their own set of rules and requirements. So until the forgiveness application comes out from the financial institution from which you got the loan, there's nothing you can do. So I don't think it's going to happen towards the end of the 24-week period, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time because, again, don't forget, we still don't have complete guidance. The safe harbor that I made mention of a few minutes ago, if you're unable to rehire people back, we still don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So we have to wait for the SBA to give guidance to the financial institutions, and then they're going to come out with the application.
So is there a time period that companies have, like a deadline period after the 24 weeks ends, to file forgiveness, like use it or lose it, file the forgiveness, or we're going to deem it to be unforgiven?
I believe, don't quote me on it because I might have not considered this to be a very critical point, and it might not have gotten ingrained in my memory like everything else, but I think you've got 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Yeah, deferral periods of principal, interest, and fees. Well, previously it was 6 months to 1 year from loan origination. So maybe.
Well, the interest gets deferred anyway for the first.
Yeah.
That's separate and apart. In terms of applying for forgiveness itself, I believe that it's 6 months, but don't quote me on it. People should just do it as soon as possible. There's no reason why they shouldn't. Be able
Yeah. So the 6-month deferral period is now, I guess, held off until the actual SBA department or the bank remits the borrower's loan forgiveness amount to the, so the SBA remits the borrower's loan forgiveness amount to the bank. So principal interest does not accrue on the principal until the SBA gets back to the bank, I guess, and says, hey, this amount is forgiven, this amount is not. So the amount that's not forgiven, start charging interest on it. Whereas previously it was 6 months from the loan date. Am I right?
Yes, I believe that that's
I
the case.
sounded correct, but I'm like playing it back in my mind. I'm like, I just confused myself.
But again, you know, who knows? They might change the stuff again.
I know. Do you
Because
think they will?
well, it depends. It depends. One second. I'm sorry. I'm doing this from home, and of course, my gardener had to come right as we're doing
I
this.
don't hear anything.
I do.
Tell him to come join.
My husband to tell him to stop blowing the leaves.
Ask him if he got the PPP. Ask him if he applied for it. Let's help him out.
Lives, right?
We'll do a case study.
Beauty of working from home. Anyway, okay. So here's the thing. Hopefully, this is not going to happen. But imagine we have a second wave of coronavirus 2 weeks from now after all the protests. And I just saw an article again saying that, oh my God, California is going to run out of ICU beds in 2 to 4 weeks. I mean, who knows if it's just noise, but if we come close to that happening, I can envision a scenario where they're going to say, okay, we're going on another lockdown for however long, right? So if that happens and they end up closing the businesses again, then they would have to amend these rules all over again, right? Because everything's going to go back on pause. So who knows, right? It also depends on, you know, when they're going to reopen other industries. I'm actually quite surprised that, well, maybe it would be too overwhelming, but they could have done something to make this more either industry specific or somehow tied to when you're able to open your doors again. Like the guidance could have said, and I don't know why it does, you have 24 weeks from the time that, you know, the state
you reopen.
So I don't know. I'm shocked that they didn't do it this way.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's a little bit of good news for landlords, I guess, because at least the amount that they're allowed to be paid by the PPPs goes up slightly with this 40%. So hopefully that'll kind of eliminate some of the stress on property owners around town. What do you think is the most important change that's been made to the PPP?
I think it's the 60-40 ratio, and I think it's the extension of the 8-week period. I think those are going to significantly help businesses. I also wonder, and I'm not going to make any predictions at this time because I think it's too hard to tell, but I wonder if there's going to be another round of funding. And I don't mean funding for people who ended up not getting the PPP loan, because there's still money available, which really shocks me. That no one's claimed, but I wonder if depending on how things go, because look, you know, the biggest problem in my opinion is yet to come. And the reason why I say this is because it's yet to come when people are A, gonna run out of this PPP money, and B, when all the moratoriums on evictions, commercial evictions specifically, are going to run their course. So that's when people are really gonna feel like they're in trouble. I mean, I know a lot of people already feel like they are, but that's really when it's really going to hit. So I don't know. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if depending on how things went, they came out and said, okay, if you can show A, B, and C, we can increase the amount that we've already given you by X. I mean, maybe it's wishful thinking. Also, what are they going to do with all this money that no one's claimed? It would be nice if they somehow, you know, put it back into the pool for people to claim. You know, because originally when this happened, no one
I was
expected
gonna, yeah.
lockdown to last this long, right? So now these businesses need a longer term assistance. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe nothing will happen, but those are my
Yeah.
thoughts.
And I think earlier on with the early amounts that were given, the application process was not very clear at all. So I think a lot of people, or at least when I speak to a lot of clients, you know, they didn't fill out the application correctly. So, you know, I have a handful of clients who actually missed out on a lot of money because they miscalculated their payroll costs. You know, they didn't include certain,
Yeah.
yeah, they didn't include certain things that they were entitled to, so they got a smaller amount. So I definitely think that you're on the money on that one. Hopefully they'll be able to put it back in the pot and then do what they're doing with the EIDL and say, hey, you know, you can come back and ask us for more.
Right.
And we'll hopefully review it and give it to you.
Right, right. So
So for,
I also read some stuff that just generally speaking, they're gearing up for some sort of like a third stimulus to individuals and to businesses. So I don't know. We'll see what that's going to look like. But you know, if that does come out, then I'm inclined to think that they would probably scrutinize need a lot more than they did the first time around.
yeah. Well, awesome. I think that's all the information related to this. Did I miss asking you about any provisions? That I think you covered everything that I had on my question list.
I don't think so. I think we got it all.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is it's become more favorable. So if you were maybe not applying for the PPP loan because you were thinking like, you know, I'm a nail salon, I'm not open, I won't be able to open and use the funds properly. So what's the point of, you know, applying? I think this kind of like reprioritizes and I think it'll give you guys more encouragement to actually go out and apply for it. Again, there's funds available, and the extension of the time period is so flexible that I feel like anyone can get it done and get it forgiven. I think there's going to be a very small percentage that don't get forgiven, and of those, there will be a lot that will not be forgiven because of a technical issue, because of an application or understanding of the application that was filled out correctly. That's the second thing I want to recommend to all of you. If you're doing this on your own, and you have large amounts that you're looking to get forgiven, it may be worth consulting with someone like Natela or a CPA that's providing the service and have them fill out your forgiveness application. I know that it'll be more costly to do it that way, and you might think you can do it on your own, but it'll definitely be, I think, a little bit more of a guaranteed method of doing it.
There's actually something else that I wanted to point out that I just thought of, and there's really no solution to this, but you know, there are these people, the very early takers, so to speak, the ones that got these PPP loans, you know, right in the beginning. And so because this new guidance just came out, a lot of them probably were like, okay, well, we can't reopen. We have to use up the money anyway. We might as well pay the employees that are sitting at home. And so they essentially, from the business's perspective, they had wasted the money because they thought
did people really do that? Did they just pay employees for doing nothing at home?
there is a restaurant in Sherman Oaks that paid all of its employees because they thought, you know, the money, like they weren't open, or at least not at full capacity, but they paid everyone because they were like, okay, well, you know, either we're going to have to pay this back, or we might as well give it to our employees that were good to
And
us.
help them out.
So we're just going to pay. And so they did. And now like the money's gone. So I don't really know what's going to happen there, but you know, sounds like a lawsuit might be brewing.
So many employment issues, right? There's just so many employment issues that I hope the employees in that scenario understand the nice act of kindness that the employer did by paying them, and say, okay, well, let me work backwards and pay it all back by actually doing my work now. Yeah, I think a lot of people rush to use the money, and they may or may not have used it correctly, without guidance because of that timeline coming up. So I think there's going to be a lot of explanation letters submitted with the application for forgiveness.
Right. I agree.
All righty. Well, this wraps up our live for today. We're going to hop over to Instagram to continue the conversation, so you guys can join us there. Otherwise, thank you so much, Natela, again, for spending your Friday afternoon with me.
Armine, for having me again. It's always a pleasure. Maybe we'll see each other again in a few weeks when they revise it yet for the, I don't know, 5th time.
We definitely will. If they do it again, you're back on.
Okay, I like it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.